Hi, I'm Albert Pasaoa.
Hello, my name is Kevin Jefferies.
And this is the 635 Podcast. The 635 Podcast is about local politics, economics, and social and cultural issues in the Alvin Community College area. The views expressed on the show are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of Alvin Community College. And welcome back to the 635 Podcast. I'm here today with Karina Lovas. She is one of our instructors of government here at Alvin Community College. And she's been teaching here for, how many years have you been teaching here?
Since spring 2020.
Spring 20. Oh, so you came in, you're
Yes.
a Corona baby.
Yes, I came in January and had like one normal month, and then we left for spring break. And I was like, bye. Have a great week. I'll miss you guys. And then I never saw them again.
So you had fall, what was fall of 2020?
Fall of 2020.
No. What's that?
Fall of 2019. I was still at my old job.
Okay.
And then so I had like the year of being virtual or remote or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is like my second semester being back in person.
So you started in fall.
In spring.
You started in spring.
January of 2020, yeah.
Okay, you figure I should know this, but I mean, I hadn't met you for like a long time.
Yeah.
I just see you on the email. Like, okay, I guess we got a new person.
Yeah.
That's great. So
it was me.
well, nice to meet you.
Yes, you as well.
So welcome to ACC. What's your background? Where were you from before?
So I actually came from Corpus Christi. I was teaching at a community college there called Del Mar College, and I taught both government and history as a full-time instructor, but I was still on kind of like a year-to-year contract, and they didn't have any tenure track positions open. And so when I saw the Alvin position, I kind of wanted that sort of permanency, and I applied, and I didn't hear anything for a while, so I kind of expected that I didn't get selected, and then eventually I got picked, and then I came to campus actually and did a in-person interview and met with the president of ACC and whatnot. And then I was hired like after finals of fall of 2019, and then started, I think, like 3 days before the semester started. So I had a very quick kind of turnaround.
So your very first semester here was the coronavirus part.
Yeah.
Okay, so you started teaching and then.
And it was interrupted by the, yeah.
Well, that's pretty. Well, no, I don't want to say that was cool, but
It was interesting. I made the mistake of saying a few times, like, I just need an extra week because my apartment was still like unpacked, and I was just feeling very like, if I just had a little bit of time in my apartment, I could get everything settled and I would feel much better. And then turns out being in my apartment for like 6 months straight didn't really help.
Yeah, so you still have boxes laying around? Or,
yeah.
Yeah, because
now I moved again and I still have boxes.
Yeah, yeah, that happened to me. My garage was full of boxes before, after a few years, and then I just have to remember what do I have in those boxes?
Yeah.
But I was digging through, you dig through them, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's where that thing was.
Yeah.
So, how did you get into government? What's your educational background?
So for undergrad, I went to Texas State University, which is in San Marcos, and I was a political science major. I think originally when I started school, when I finished high school, I wanted to go to law school. And then I sort of didn't love like the law specific stuff that I was learning in school, but I liked kind of studying how government was used to do things, to fix things, to as sort of an agent of change. And I enjoyed sort of focusing the sort of policy study on ways that like social movements have impacted different parts of policy and all that. So when I graduated with my undergrad, I decided to go back to the same school and get my master's, and enjoyed that master's program at Texas State a lot. And then I thought it might be fun to get a PhD in political science.
Oh, of course.
turns out it wasn't super fun, and I didn't love it. And probably the program that I picked wasn't really the right fit for me. So
Where was this program?
I went to University of Houston. So I moved to Houston and was here for a year at UH, but just didn't love it. It's no offense to UH. It's a great program with great instructors and professors, and my cohort was really lovely and everything. It just didn't feel like it was the right fit for me. And the statistics that I had, done fine in my master's program just wasn't clicking in the PhD. And so I left that job or that school and program, and then I took a job at A&M Kingsville, which is a A&M branch campus or school in Kingsville, which is right outside of Corpus. And I worked there for a year, and I had renewed my contract and everything. I was going to work there another year, but Del Mar actually recruited me and asked me to come work for them. And by that time, I had started another master's in history, and they had me teach history, and that was really fun. I got to teach a lot of history there, and then finished that degree, and then eventually found myself here. So I was there for about 3 years, or at Del Mar for about 3 years.
So what, how long were you in your PhD program before?
Just a year.
Oh, that's good. You don't want to bail after 3, 4, 5 or more years.
Oh, does that sound familiar?
No comment, but yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah, I didn't sink too much time.
Yeah, because I saw that a lot in my economics graduate school, and a lot of people come in and they definitely bail because it looks so different from undergraduate work. A lot of people are shocked. We're like, what the heck is this? And they feel almost like it's a different field.
Yeah, it was completely different than what my study had been, and it was just the discipline has moved so much more in a lot of the research and scholarship to being statistics based that no one at Texas State in that department of my graduate program was really doing. So I'd taken a statistics class and done it a little bit, and I was like, oh, I could handle it. And maybe I could handle it in one class where it's contained and it's not in every single class, and you're not expected to do your own research and papers with statistics. And I was like, no, this is not for me.
What sort of research are you interested, or were you interested in?
I liked the sort of application of international law and U.S. law. And so this is really depressing, I'm sorry. My master's thesis actually dealt with how international law has changed to treat conflict-related sexual violence. So did a lot of work with records from the different tribunals of the Yugoslavian wars from the 90s and the ICC or the International Criminal Court and things like that, and sort of how the U.S. has treated that kind of stuff. And I kind of wanted to do that, going forward, but I don't know, it's probably not the cheeriest of subjects. Probably fine to move away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so you did your thesis on that. And were you interested in pursuing that further in the PhD?
I was, but there was a faculty member there who sort of overlapped with that, and she ended up leaving right when I started. So there wasn't even really anyone who was super focused on that particular sort of thing. So probably wouldn't have worked even if I had toughed it out and gone farther into the program. It would have had to pivot to something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you always feel that you would be involved in teaching, or were you thinking you would be more doing research or advocacy, or what was your plan going in, either going into PhD program or coming out of it?
Well, I think when I first started my master's program at Texas State, so right after I was done with undergrad, I kind of thought of that I would be maybe more involved with research or advocacy. And then as a graduate student in my first year, I was a TA or teaching assistant for faculty, and I really enjoyed that. And then later on in that program, I actually got to be a graduate instructor of record, have my own classes, and start teaching their, intro level government courses there. And I really liked that. And definitely those sort of positions really set me up to succeed at community colleges that I worked at afterwards and at other places. So I didn't necessarily from the beginning think that I would be teaching, but once I started teaching, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Are you from Texas? Were you born in this area?
I did grow up in College Station. Actually, I was born and raised in College Station.
Oh, I just went there during the last, I think, spring break.
How was it?
Went there on accident because we actually went to go visit some family friends in Albuquerque. And so we drove, crazy. And then on the way back, I think I was just looking at the map and I'm like, hey, there's College Station. I've heard of it. I didn't even think that there was a major university there.
Big one.
I only remember two things about College Station. Okay. One is there's a statistical program called STATA. I don't know if you ever use that in grad school.
I never use STATA. I use SPSS and R.
R. That's hardcore. But we use STATA, and I always know it was made in College Station because when you open it, it says College Station. Okay, that's one. And then two, I think I remember when President H.W. Bush died. I think his little train was going to College Station.
Yeah, it's where his presidential library is actually. So him and Barbara are interned there. Oh, wow. And they had their headstone a long time. Like, it was already set. I remember seeing it as a kid and being like, I don't understand.
Yeah, you reach the age where you're like, okay, we're going to die at some point. Let's start making plans, you know. Yeah, as young people, it's like, that sounds creepy. But then older people, it's just like, we're just being...
And it's, I think, comforting to have it settled. I mean, their stuff would be settled anyway because they're, prestigious. But actually, they had a daughter that died in childbirth, and they moved her to be there, too.
Wow.
So they have a whole, family plot.
Look at this random presidential facts you just threw out.
I do know a lot of random presidential facts, but so we used to. My mom loves outdoor parks and walking areas, and the area by the George Bush Library is super nice to walk around.
Is that by the college?
Yeah, it is kind of by the college, even though he didn't go there. But no, it's a nice library and area, and you can walk around. And
so you grew up in that area?
I did.
So just as a little kid.
Yeah.
What is that like growing up in a college? Wait, how big? I mean, what chunk of the population are college students? I mean, it's I guess the largest university in the country, right? In terms of population, is
one of them. I think UT is technically bigger, but I think the whole A&M system is a tiny bit bigger because they have more campuses.
Okay.
But one of the biggest. So. College Station's grown a lot significantly since I was a kid, but when I was a kid, probably the college population equaled the city. And so your life would get very disrupted, when things happen. So move-in week is a nightmare. and we always have to
all the parents are coming in. The
you have to plan ahead, you cannot go to Walmart or Target or any of those places or grocery store when everyone's moving in because you have to go and you buy your Ethernet cords and your whatever else you need, your shower curtains and stuff. So it would just be insane. And then all the restaurants and stuff would be super crowded. So you have to kind of plan ahead.
Yeah. What about football games? Was that?
Yeah. Especially for really big ones, things would get really hectic. We didn't live super close to where the stadium is, but a good time to do stuff is during the game if you're not watching because everyone's occupied by it. So
okay.
We used to if you need to do something
go
run
out.
Run
go
an
to the
errand,
store.
yeah, or go to the mall or something
It's a great game. Let's go shopping.
Yeah. I mean, that would my dad would usually watch, but.
That's amazing how big that school is. I always wondered what it'd be like growing up next to a major university.
Yeah.
Did you ever have aspirations to go there?
So When I was, older, high school, I was like, I don't want to live here anymore. And I don't want to go to this school. And I had this like negative, perception about A&M. Not in hindsight, I'm like, it's a very good school.
Mm-hmm.
It's, like better school than I went to. But I just didn't want to live in College Station anymore.
Oh,
and
that's
that was
right.
like, that's what made it the worst school ever. So I applied. And I got in, but I just super did not want to go there.
Oh, you applied and got in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think my parents like strongly encouraged it, requested it. But they were also pretty accepting of me not going to A&M because, I think they understood that I didn't want to live at home, and they probably didn't want me to live at home. And, it didn't make sense to like spend a lot of money on an apartment or a dorm there in a town that you live in.
And so the college you went to was what?
Texas State.
State.
In San Marcos, which is like 2.5 hours from College Station.
Okay.
So I grew up in College Station and lived there, but my parents actually moved to out of state in 2014. So I haven't really been back to College Station very much at all.
Oh, okay.
So I don't have like ties there. So I was in grad school when they moved. And now they're in Florida. They were in Wisconsin, so
I was just about to ask. They moved to California, Florida, the big.
Wisconsin, and then Florida.
So, what made you choose to go to? I just keep forgetting the name.
Texas State.
Texas State. That's too. Now, is that when you say Texas State? Is that like a chain of colleges?
No, it's actually its own thing. It used to be Southwestern State. Or Southwest Texas State, and then they changed their name, and so it's like south of Austin, so it's pretty close to Austin, but it's not the same as University of Texas, which is in Austin, and it's a pretty big school. It's probably like 30,000 people, I would guess. So it's a big school. It's another college town, but it's really pretty. There's like a river that goes through campus. There's this cool like outdoor culture, just kind of a different vibe, if you will, than College Station.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Did you do a tour of college campuses, like when you were deciding where you wanted to go, or?
I never did a formal tour of Texas State, but actually when I was in high school, I was on the debate team, and I did so much debate in my high school career. And I actually had gone to debate camp at Texas State because at that time, it doesn't exist anymore. But they had a big forensics program, and they had hosted camp for high school students. And so you lived in a dorm, and you ate in the cafeteria. You basically were a student for like, I think 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
You go off to camp to argue with other people. That's that's interesting. Debate. What was that? Is that it was sort of a club you joined?
Yeah, it was a club or team. And so originally you can kind of join. You take a class as well. So the debate 1, and you learn sort of the basics of all the different kinds of debate, all the different big speech events, and part of your grade is competing at tournaments and that are on the weekends. So because College Station is kind of far from Houston and kind of far from Austin, our tournaments are always overnight in those places. So, got to see a lot of different high schools, a lot of different, meet a lot of different people and compete. And it was,
That's pretty cool. It's kind of like being an athlete, but
an
intellectual intellectual warrior.
It sounds ridiculous to say to someone who wasn't in debate, but because you have to practice so much, because there's so much research that goes into all of the kinds of debate, like it really is as time intensive as some sports.
I would imagine.
Sports are, and then you're gone all weekend, and you get back like super late Saturday night, and their tournaments are really tiring. I had actually not been debate adjacent at all for many years, but I have gotten married recently to a debate coach.
Oh.
So I found myself over spring break. I went to 2 different state tournaments with him, and I was like, wow, this is weird memories that are being brought back.
I wonder what the husband-wife arguments sound like there. I mean,
So even though we're both like, experienced with debate and stuff, neither of us like confrontation at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it helps with communication skills, which is good.
yeah, I mean, that's a definite bonus to sell a debate program.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, how do they decide, like, who wins the debate? What kind of criteria are they using?
Well, it depends on what kind of debate it is. So the kind that I did is called policy or CX debate, and or cross-examination. And so it's a 2-person kind of debate, and there's a topic that everyone competes with for a whole year, and for a whole academic year. And so
So one topic for the entire year? Wow.
So it'll be like the U.S. federal government should blah, 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 whatever. So they usually kind of cycle. Sometimes it's like water access, or sometimes it's like criminal justice stuff or whatever. And so you, in a debate, can either be affirmative or negative. And you typically have kind of pre-planned things. You have a case you run if you're affirmative of, how you think that you can solve for the topic and what you'll do for the topic. And then you have kind of pre-planned things that you'll do on the negative as well. Like, this is why these sorts of things are bad, and this is why maybe we shouldn't change it, or whatever. And they can get very specific into very general. Like, you can run different arguments that are like, capitalism is bad, which is why we shouldn't engage with the topic at all. So it really depends on what you do. So if you're judging a round or a debate, you're looking for like who conveys their argument throughout the debate the best, whose evidence is best, who convinces you that their impacts are going to be greater, those sorts of things. So there is some degree of subjectivity to judging a debate, but it's not as subjective as you might think. It's not like watching presidential candidates like yell at each other and determining who wins. It's like there's a little bit more to that.
Well, I would imagine the judges are, experienced, and they sort of just
sometimes,
dissect.
yeah.
Oh,
sometimes less
well,
experienced than you would want.
That makes me wonder. I mean, there are, different, in the real world, there's different types of debates. And in some ways, the most ideal, I guess, would be people using facts and reasoning and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
is there a variation of a debate where it's primarily around, maybe being convincing, but not necessarily because of facts? Do they have any types of debates where that type of stuff, like insinuating negative things about your opponent, is actually rewarded, or is it always just let's be, academic type debates?
There's not really, like, I guess you could be in a round where a judge is going to be okay if you're sort of, insulting your opponents, but typically not. It's all the kinds of debate that I have seen, and I feel like I've seen them all. It is like who upholds, the topic the best, and who, is the most convincing in their winning of the, using their evidence the best.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Is it is debate teams, is that a common thing at high schools, or?
Yeah, most high schools, for the most part, do have active debate teams. Some more competitive than others, because it does take a certain amount of kind of cooperation from your administration and a certain amount of funds, right, to be competitive. And especially in those sort of really research intense kinds of debates, it's difficult for you to just do it on your own. If you don't have, a team of people who are experienced in debate who can help you, write your cases and stuff, it's difficult to be as competitive.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if they used sort of debate and sort of incorporated it into like traditional classes, right?
Yeah.
Like a history class, you'll debate something about the topic.
Yeah.
That would be that'd be fun. would guess that it would motivate people if they know they have to get up there and someone's gonna
Yeah.
pick up, like their own classmate is gonna be criticizing their arguments. That maybe that might motivate them.
A lot of the debate organizations have all sorts of like statistics that people who are, in debate at least 1 year or more in high school are, I think, like a ridiculous percentage, like 60% of them go on to get advanced degrees, and they're, do better in college. And I think that there's definitely truth to that. Like, I learned how to research, how to think about arguments, and even though I didn't end up debating in college, those skills were so useful. And I think I did so much better in college and later in grad school because I was in debate. So it's, I think, a really good thing to be involved in.
Yeah, and not just that, the intellectual part, but it sounds like, I mean, if you can get up in front of people and be there,
Sure,
debating somebody in sort of a high stakes environment, I would figure that would build some type of resiliency. So just for that alone,
Yeah.
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, and there's other like speech events that most people do. Like a really popular one that most debaters do is called extemporaneous speaking. So you go into a room, and when your number is called, you go and you draw a topic, and it's just like a question about current events. So it can be like, what do you think Stalin is going to do? It wouldn't be Stalin because that's not current. What do you think Putin is going to do, right? And with this, and you have, evidence that you have pulled before, and you can utilize that, and you write, draft a speech in 30 minutes, and then you give it to a judge.
Oh, wow.
So you learn, to be familiar with what's going on and how to kind of craft a speech using that.
I would love them to sneak in like a fake topic. So now that Putin has fled Russia
Yeah.
and is currently in Hawaii, should the Hawaiian authorities arrest him?
Sometimes you have students that will they don't know, so they just make something up. And I'm sure it works on some judges, but sometimes if you're judging it and you actually have a background in whatever they're talking about, sometimes it can be very painful. I've been in that position many times.
Yeah. That reminds me of in a math class, there was a multiple page proof of some answer, and then there was some middle part that I couldn't figure it out. I just knew the beginning and the end. And I just sort of wrote kind of sloppy in the middle, hoping like a TA is just going to blow. And I didn't get marked off, so I guess
It worked.
stuff like that works.
Yeah, it works sometimes. It's a risk.
So in terms of teaching, what do you think? I don't know. What do you like to bring to the table in terms of your teaching style, or?
In terms of like style, I like to, have a kind of conversational classroom where, there's lots of discussion with students, and it works best when students are engaged, which, can go either way, some depending on the class.
Yeah.
And I like to incorporate, kind of outside elements or videos or things to look at. And I really enjoy teaching like civil rights stuff. So,
Well, hot topic now.
Yeah.
I mean, people should pay attention. Well, I mean, I don't know how they're.
Yeah, the different like stuff that they can look at with that, and students tend to respond well to that. They like it.
Well, it's interesting because I got a political science bachelor's degree.
Oh, okay.
And I did that in California under political. First of all, I want to ask, why do they call it government and not political science? Is there a difference when schools say we're teaching government versus political science?
Yes and no. So most community colleges in Texas call it government, and it's usually because they only have the intro level classes that are like either federal or Texas.
I see.
And, with political science, they have departments at like universities. They have more
political theory, foreign policy, all sorts of
international
topics.
Relations.
Okay, so the
Statistics.
2 classes are just literally kind of the structure of governments.
Yeah. I mean, I could be wrong about that. That's what I've always assumed.
I mean, I definitely. I mean, I don't know why they call it government or not, but I've noticed the difference because I remember my first political science class. It was federal, but it was much more. I mean, obviously you guys focus on the Constitution and the structure of government and stuff, but just looking over the syllabi and the way teachers in our department teach, it seems to be very topical. Like because I remember taking almost all my political science classes, we rarely talked about sort of big current event issues. A lot of it is either historical or theoretical or talking about the structure of government. And so I think that's actually really, really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could teach like federal government and just talk, the straight kind of history, how things have changed. How does it look now? But if you're not talking about like what it's doing right now, I feel like it's more difficult to connect to.
Oh yeah.
And you have students that are like getting ready to vote or kind of on that verge, or maybe they have started voting. It's important for them to sort of know who those people are and what they do and what role that they have in their life, because sometimes government can feel really far away.
Yeah.
But in reality, they make real life decisions that affect your sort of day-to-day life, and whether that's like how much tuition you're paying or what your property taxes are or what school your kids go to. All that stuff is a part of it. So if you're not talking about like what's happening right now, I feel like it's more difficult to to kind of engage. But also you have to kind of walk the line of like how much do you talk about from right now and how much opinion is too much opinion, and you don't want to alienate certain students. You don't want to cause a riot.
Yeah, I mean I guess that is sort of a danger zone there. I mean, does that have lines gotten crossed much in your experience teaching?
So I've probably like said things that are probably like right to the line in terms of revealing what my opinions are, but typically I am pretty good at sort of playing both sides.
Do you deliberately try to hide your opinions, or?
I try to. I try to kind of at least make it seem like I'm in the middle as much as possible. And I think for the most part, most students do think that. They think that I'm politically in the middle, which I'm not. So I did it. Success.
That's good. And so you also teach history. Now how does that differ in terms of just the classroom experience? Is there a lot current events that are brought up in history? Or?
Well, so it depends on what history you're teaching. So typically the intro level classes are broken up to be like exploration, so the Spanish coming to the Western Hemisphere in the 1400s all the way through the Civil War to Reconstruction. So kind of, the end of or later part of the 1800s. And then the second class, so you can kind of relate some of that stuff to today, but there's not really like recent stuff to talk about in that class. But then the second class is basically like the Gilded Age, the end of the 1800s to now, which is a lot to pack in. And so my like last lecture that I just finished to post is like 100 slides because there's a lot that's happened in the last few years. You have to put a slide in there about the pandemic and
so the first course goes up to the Civil War, or right after?
Yeah, right after the Civil War. It depends on the school, but typically stops at Reconstruction.
Okay, that's kind of funny because when I was in college studying this, that is also the cutoff point.
It has been the cutoff kind of historically for a long time.
And fast forward a few decades, at some point the second half is just going to keep growing longer.
I was just thinking about this last night. I'm like, I feel like we should bump up the start of this. But all the major history books, written start, the book, the second half of the book, or sometimes they're written separately, the volume 2, if you will, they all start with the Gilded Age, and all the other books end with either Civil War or Reconstruction. And so there's going to need to be like a kind of a collaboration of a lot of people.
So different people write, I guess that makes sense, but are there typically different authors who write sort of the first quote unquote first half versus the second half?
I mean, I think it probably depends on which textbook you use. The one that I used mostly before I came here, it was the same author, and he's like a preeminent, his name is Eric Foner, preeminent historian.
Yeah, because he's claiming to know everything
yeah,
for this area. That's
well,
pretty bold.
It's not even that he knows everything, and it's that he has directed dissertations of people who have all sorts of specialties, you know, in the beginning, you know, part of the book and in the second. So if you kind of read some of the books that he's like, you know, thanked in, and then read the book, you're like, oh, it makes sense why he would include this. You know, so he just sort of draws from everything as the survey author. And that's kind of, I guess, the beauty of writing a survey book like that, because it doesn't have to be super, super detailed, and you can kind of, you know, rely on the books of other people.
Yeah, and I would imagine there would be, because there's so much to draw on, but you can't draw on everything. There's got to be huge debates about what are we going to spend, you know, our
what
time
do you have
covering.
To put in there? Well, and I think like recently there's kind of more and more focus on this, right? The way that kids learn history, you know, what to incorporate, and there's been a big push over the last 40 or so years to, you know, have more women's voices in history and have more people of color, and that sort of line of, you know, what to include and what not to include can be very contentious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I would imagine. I do think at some point, let me see, I'm trying to guess the obvious cutoff, the next cutoff point, was that going to be World War II? I mean, that kind of makes sense, but maybe we need another 20 years before. Yeah. It's got to be 100 years. I was thinking
like right up to World War I would be more easier.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
At least a little bit. Well, you might be right. You might need to cut it off after that.
Maybe they could leave it at a cliffhanger. They could do it like at the Roaring 20s.
Yeah.
Oh, look how happy people are. And then throw in some foreboding, you know, hint as a dun dun dun.
And then you'd start the class with like the Great Depression and the New Deal.
Yeah, I like that. Like history as movies. What do you think in terms of using videos and movies and documentaries?
I like it. And I think especially like, it can, number one, kind of be a break from listening to themselves/me talk. And I think it's cool to kind of get a kind of more humanizing sort of look at something. So in history, I recently showed like an episode of Band of Brothers.
Nice.
World War II, you know, mini show or whatever.
Oh, yeah, I remember I watched that.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
And like, it's kind of humanizing, because it's hard for them to sort of understand kind of the magnitude of a lot of that kind of stuff, and to show that, you know, that the real people whose lives were like very fundamentally changed by this. And I showed documentaries and stuff for other parts in the class, but typically they enjoy those for the most part. Give them a look at kind of what's going on, and kind of hear real people's experiences and voices. Yeah,
I mean that would be an awesome book where you're just reading about World War II, and then suddenly see this clip from Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
And then every paragraph there's potentially something, but not as much opportunity in government in terms of.
There's still some, you know, opportunity. So when I teach federal government, I like to show a documentary called A Class Apart, which is about a Supreme Court case from Texas from the 50s called Hernandez versus Texas. And this is the case basically that ruled that Hispanic or Mexican Americans needed to be treated, or, you know, were guaranteed 14th Amendment protections basically. So, you know, legally you're considered white if you're Hispanic in Texas and federally. And so Texas would be like, yeah, you're white, but wouldn't treat them as such. So basically they were like, 14th Amendment protections apply to this group as well.
Well, wait, why were they considered white?
That's just the legal classification of still today. When you file your census and stuff, that's what the classification is, and you're like Latino or non-Latino. It's like, it's considered an ethnicity, not a race. I don't know.
Huh.
I know, it's confusing. And kids are always like, wait, what? So this documentary is like about the case, the lawyers that argued Hernandez versus Texas in front of the Supreme Court. They were the first kind of like Mexican-American lawyers to go in front of the Supreme Court, and what happened and what the court ruled and what that meant for the Mexican-American community in Texas and then more broadly. So it's kind of brings kind of a more local look at, the civil rights movement. And a lot of times, we kind of teach that stuff in this country as being black and white, but there's lots of other shades.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of, students like that it's, a place that they know of in Texas and, that they can kind of relate to it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I actually just showed a documentary this week in Texas government about an election in 2002, which is kind of a long time ago now, but it's just a really interesting look at like this Texas House race and how what the candidates did and like what contributed to affecting their campaigns, and then ends with like election night.
So that's a documentary just on a, wow. I like that. It's sort of very focused in on.
Yeah. So it's focused in on the House race. It also looks at the statewide races. So Rick Perry was running for his first term as being governor on his own, because he had just taken over for George Bush when he was elected president, and it looks at the Senate race too. So it touches on the statewide races, but then it focuses in on this House race, which is in Central Texas, and kind of compared it to the rest of the stuff going on. So it's really, and they usually get a kick out of it because you see like a very humanizing side of these politicians, and they have really strong opinions on who they think is going to win. And if you can get them not to Google who wins, they generally like, being surprised or not surprised at the end.
Oh yeah. No, that sounds fun. And speaking of that, what would you say in terms of political movies, like thrillers or whatever? What do you think they typically get wrong? Like, I don't know. You must watch them and say like, what? I don't know.
I don't know if I've seen a political thriller in a while.
Were you a House of Cards fan?
I did watch some House of Cards. It was like a little too much for me.
I haven't watched it, so I have no idea.
There's a lot going on. I think, except for sort of how prolific they are in passing laws, I mean, it was relatively accurate, except for, they're off murdering people sometimes, and they seem to get away with that, which I would like to think that they wouldn't. I don't know if that happened a lot or if it was just in one episode. I can't think of anything that was like terribly off base. And a show a little older like The West Wing, I've watched that, and there weren't any really glaring things that were wrong, except for I think there was a little bit more compromise than sometimes there is in reality.
Oh, West Wing, was that the Aaron Sorkin one?
Yeah.
Oh, I loved that, at least the first few seasons.
Yeah.
I thought it was very well written.
Yeah, it's pretty well written, and it's very idealistic. They're all like people who are like really motivated to like do good and to help people, which might not always be the case in some administrations or.
Well, the show itself is, I guess, a product of its era. When did that run? Like,
It started in the 90s, so it started under Clinton.
Okay.
And then it becomes this kind of like idealistic like opposition to like the Bush administration. And I think it ended in like 2005, around there, like some mid 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely, they would have to reflect like the current environment. That'd be interesting to see what it would be like throughout the last few years.
There's like a famous episode. So in, I think the second season or the first season or some season, 9/11 had just happened, and they were like, you need to do something to address this. And he was like, no.
For the West Wing? Oh my God.
So they were like, no, you got to. So he like wrote a capsule episode where they like talk about terrorism very broadly, and while they're like locked down in the White House, and then like they inserted that in the beginning of the season. And so if you look at like the listing of episodes, it's listed as episode 0.
Oh, nice.
And he doesn't like, Aaron Sorkin like doesn't count it as an episode.
Yeah, I remember that episode, and I remember just
everyone hates it.
Yeah, because it just felt like he was shoehorning. I'm like,
this
is
I guess the network made him do it.
Oh wow. Interesting. I mean, in a way, it's like, because it's going to be on everyone's mind. So I think there's actually a term for it in Hollywood. It's called like lamp shading or something. It's like when you know that there's something that the audience is going to be sort of bothered by, you've got to somehow mention it just to get it off their mind. Or something.
Okay.
Like, why aren't they talking about 9/11?
Yeah.
It's like, there, we talked about it.
Yeah. But in like the most general of terms, like they don't mention actual 9/11. They just talk sort of about terrorism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
And-
that was a good show.
Yeah.
Can you recall a show about a governor, a TV show about a governor?
Ooh.
You're too young.
No. What is the...
I think it was a California. Wow. Now I'm really showing how old I am. I think the show was it called Benson? I don't know if the older people in the room might know this, but he was about the California governor.
Oh, okay.
I think it was about his lieutenant governor. It was orbited around him, but then he was then the governor sort of played a part-time role or something.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
That's enjoyable.
all I remember is that they were preparing for like a nuclear strike or something.
Oh, it was like one of those time capsules.
And so let's finish up on what do you think are some, I don't know, what are the sort of political issues that you see just generally like in this area, like now that you sort of moved out here, and are there just broad generalization, or is it very just similar to the rest of the state?
I mean, I think that probably the area of Corpus Christi that I lived in kind of has a lot of the same sort of issues as here, with, you know, the balance between property taxes and like education and not wanting to pay more state taxes, but not having as much kick in from the state for education. So the kind of funding considerations being an issue. I mean, I think that's probably the whole country and definitely all of Texas.
Yeah.
And, you know, issues with sort of like accommodating the fact that the state is growing and the infrastructure that has to go along with that, you know, with wider roads, with more lanes, with, you know, building new, you know, neighborhoods. And then along with that, you need new schools and all that kind of stuff, you know, that kind of growing pains that go along with that. I don't think this area is struggling with that quite as much as other places, like, you know, probably famously Austin just cannot grow enough to accommodate everyone that lives there. But, you know, certainly something that's going to continue being an issue as Texas continues to grow in this area too.
No, that's funny. That's something that Kevin Jeffries talks a lot about, like the growth and how we adjust to that. So, so we're going to have to make sure to get you back on the show at some point in the future to talk about those issues and not just House of Cards or West Wing or something. But thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.